The first thing that has to be broken is the fantasy itself. Being chosen by God does not mean being spared confusion, spared loss, or treated like a favored guest in a world built for comfort. In an Islamic sense, the sign is often the opposite. Allah does not always reveal his concern by making the road smooth. Many times, he reveals it by refusing to let you settle inside what would have ruined you. What people call a blessed life is often just an uninterrupted attachment to dunya, and what they call a cursed season can be the beginning of basira, that inner sight that finally reads events correctly. So, when everything starts making sense, it is usually not because the world has become gentle. It is because Allah has removed a veil. The disappointments are no longer random. The silence is no longer empty. The delay is no longer humiliation. You begin to see that the story was never, "Why is this happening to me?" The story was, "What is Allah saving me from? And what is He forcing me to face?" That is a much more demanding truth than the soft spiritual slogans people like to repeat, and it is closer to how divine guidance actually enters a life. Outwardly, the chosen person can look abandoned. Their plans collapse. At the point where success seemed near, people they trusted suddenly become distant, dismissive, even cruel. Doors open halfway and then close with a sound they cannot forget. The heart says, "This is failure." The nafs says, "You are being left behind." The world agrees, because the world judges by visible movement. Money gained, networks built, status preserved, marriage secured, image protected. But reality is often running on a different track beneath what can be seen. A person may be applauded and still be drifting further from Allah each month. Another may be stripped of one false security after another and be moving with terrifying precision toward the only security that cannot collapse. In the Quranic way of seeing, truth and appearance part company again and again. Fir'aun looked untouchable right up until he was not. Yusuf was thrown away before he was raised. Musa fled like a man, defeated before his path was opened. The believer who does not understand this contrast will keep misreading the map. He will envy what should frighten him and resent what may be purifying him. That is why the revelation of truth rarely arrives as a dramatic, mystical scene. More often, it arrives as a reorganization of meaning. The same betrayal remains betrayal, but now you see that your dependence on that person had become unhealthy long before they left. The same delay remains a delay, but now you see that your heart had started worshipping the outcome more than trusting the giver. The same loneliness remains lonely, but now you understand how noisy your life had become, how every spare second was being spent proving yourself to people who could not benefit or harm you except by Allah's permission. This is the hidden reason many believers feel that strange sentence forming in them after a season of breaking. Everything makes sense now, not because every question has been answered in detail, but because the central axis has shifted. You are no longer interpreting life through ego, timing, social comparison, or wounded pride. You are interpreting it through rububiyyah, through the lordship of Allah over every opening and every withholding. Once that axis moves, the fragments begin to align. Even pain becomes legible. The real battle happens inside that shift, because the nafs hates being displaced from the center. It would rather believe that all suffering is injustice than admit that some suffering is exposure. It would rather call itself unlucky than confess that it was attached, arrogant, heedless, or intoxicated by approval. This is why the chosen path feels so severe. Allah is not merely changing your circumstances, He is correcting your interpretation of yourself. He lets you discover how much of your so-called sincerity was tied to being seen as sincere. He lets you feel how much of your patience depended on getting what you wanted eventually. He lets your usual methods stop working so that tawakkul is no longer an Islamic word you admire, but a condition you are forced to inhabit. Suddenly, you cannot charm your way through, plan your way through, or outwork the decree. You can only stand where Allah placed you and decide what kind of servant you will be there. That is when truths surface that comfort never reveals. Some people were never your people, some ambitions were never clean, some versions of yourself had to die, and they were not going to leave politely. Picture a small everyday scene. It is before Fajr, and the apartment is still dark except for the weak yellow light over the stove. A man is sitting at the kitchen table with unpaid bills spread out in front of him, the phone screen face down because he already knows there are no replies worth reading. He had expected this year to be the year everything turned. Instead, a proposal disappeared, the job he thought was secured went to someone else, and a friendship he leaned on ended with coldness he still replays in his chest. He has spent weeks moving between du'a and frustration, istighfar and exhaustion. That morning, he is too tired to perform optimism. He makes wudu without inspiration. He stands to pray because there is nothing else left to do with dignity. In sujud, with no polished language left, he says something simple. Ya Allah, if you are closing this for me, then do not let me love what you are removing. That is not a dramatic line. It is not cinematic. But it is the kind of sentence after which many lives begin to change. Because the servant has finally stopped negotiating with the truth. He is no longer asking only for the thing. He is asking to be untied from the thing. If Allah has judged it, bad for him. When truth is revealed, it often first appears as a humiliation to the ego. You realize that what hurt most was not losing the opportunity, but losing the image you had built around it. You were not just grieving a person, you were grieving the future version of yourself that person seemed to confirm. You were not just shaken by financial pressure, you were shaken by how much safety you had quietly located in numbers, accounts, and plans, rather than in Allah's decree. This is why some awakenings feel almost embarrassing. They expose how deeply worldly your measurements had become while your language remained religious. You said, Insha'Allah, but emotionally you had already acted as if the matter was yours. You said, Allah is enough for us, but you still believed the right circle, the right institution, the right market timing, the right response from one human being would finally stabilize your heart. Allah, out of mercy, sometimes dismantles these illusions, one by one. Not because he enjoys your distress, but because he knows you cannot carry idols and intimacy with him in the same chest without tearing yourself apart. Still, not every hardship means a person is chosen in the noble sense people like to claim. This is where honesty matters. Some suffering is the natural consequence of heedlessness, bad decisions, arrogance, oppression, or repeated refusal to listen. A man can ignore clear warnings, trample other people, betray trusts, chase vanity, and then dress up the collapse of his life as a special spiritual election. That is not insight. That is self-protection, wearing religious clothing. In Islam, tribulation can be purification, elevation, expiation, warning, or even punishment. The difference is not in the pain itself, but in what it produces. Does it soften the heart or harden it? Does it return the servant to salah, tawbah, truthfulness and restraint, or does it push him deeper into self-pity and blame? This nuance matters because people romanticize pain when they should be studying its effect. The chosen are not simply those who suffer. Many people suffer and become uglier. The chosen are those whom Allah does not leave inside the lie. Through hardship, he brings them to recognition, and through recognition, he changes their direction. There is also a counterexample that unsettles the shallow way people speak about divine favor. Sometimes the person whose life appears easiest is not the one most loved in the deeper sense. He may have the promotion, the admiration, the quick marriage, the glowing public image, the effortless momentum everyone else is secretly measuring themselves against. And yet nothing in his ease pushes him toward Allah. He becomes more self-sure, more distracted, more casual with prayer, more dependent on praise, more allergic to correction. Another person, meanwhile, keeps meeting refusal after refusal until the heart finally drops its performance and begins speaking to Allah with frightening sincerity. Which one is being handled with greater mercy? The dunya-trained mind answers too quickly. It thinks gifts are proof and deprivation is disgrace. But istidraj exists. A person can be given and given while moving further from what matters most. Ease is not innocent by default. Hardship is not noble by default. The truer question is always, what is this condition doing to the soul? Is it making the servant forget his Lord or making him impossible to separate from him? This is why the people around a chosen person often misunderstand the season completely. They read withdrawal as weakness, silence as bitterness, caution as coldness. They do not see the reconstruction taking place beneath the surface. When someone has been shown how fragile people are, how unstable applause is, how quickly worldly arrangements can change, he cannot always return to his former lightness on command. He becomes more selective with speech because he has learned how much damage empty speech can do. He becomes slower to trust because he now knows that not everyone sent into his life was sent to stay. He becomes less eager to impress because he has seen how exhausting it is to be governed by the eyes of others. To outsiders, this can look like he has become severe. In reality, he may simply have become awake. There is a difference between joylessness and sobriety. There is a difference between cynicism and clarity. A heart that has been reordered by Allah may still laugh, still love, still work, still build, but it no longer bows so easily to what once commanded it. Another small scene makes this clearer. A woman sits in a family gathering where everyone is speaking with that casual confidence people use when they think they understand another person's life. Someone asks about her delayed marriage with pity disguised as humor. Someone else mentions a former opportunity she should have taken. A relative praises another cousin whose life looks tidy from the outside. Years earlier, those comments would have sent her home shattered, replaying every sentence, wondering what was wrong with her, bargaining with Allah in the language of panic. This time, she feels the sting, but it does not own her. She has spent too many nights learning what nearness to Allah feels like in private, to let a room full of shallow measurements define her. She smiles, answers lightly, and changes the subject. Later, alone, she does not collapse. She opens the mushaf and reads with the strange steadiness of someone who has already lost the world several times in imagination and survived. Nothing flashy happened in that scene. No miracle split the ceiling. But the truth had been revealed. The room did not carry the authority it once did. Their scale was no longer her scale. So, when everything finally makes sense, the revelation is not that you were secretly destined for a grand earthly role, nor that every wound was preparing you for public vindication, nor that every rejection means a better visible replacement is guaranteed on your preferred timeline. The deeper revelation is harsher and cleaner than that. Allah was separating what you say you believe from what you actually depend on. He was showing you the difference between wanting Him and wanting what He can give. He was teaching you that protection does not always feel pleasant, that mercy can arrive wearing the clothes of interruption, and that clarity sometimes enters only after your old story about yourself becomes impossible to maintain. The chosen are not the spoiled. They are the interrupted, the exposed, the redirected, the ones Allah refuses to let sleep comfortably inside illusion. And when that truth settles, there is a quiet gravity to it. You stop asking why certain doors closed with so much force. You begin to understand that if they had stayed open, you might have walked through them smiling and never realized what they were taking from your soul.